Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Health Promotion Alcohol, Other Drugs, Gambling, Gaming, and Cannabis Awareness Health Promotion Annual Briefing. I'm Carissa McKay, one of the health promotion specialists in Edmonton, and today we're going to go through some considerations around substance use generally, take a look at some of the issues we are facing as a result of the pandemic, and how that's affecting substance use, as well as military culture and how that influences substance use. And then a quick look at some of the guidelines that we have in place to help people make choices that will minimize risk. I'm not going to be a talking head throughout this entire presentation, so I'm just going to turn off my camera and we're going to go through the slides, and I'll come say hello again at the end. All right, so I'm just going to, before we fully get into things, just to remind everybody in terms of the content that the presentation you are about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense, Strengthening the Forces Health Promotion. Any reproduction or transmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. So I'm going to actually pop right back into view for a quick second and ask you, substance use, whether that's alcohol, cannabis, other drugs, gaming, or gambling, what do you think the motivation is that leads people to decide that they want to choose one of these poisons, just as a euphemism? Think about that for a second, and I'm going to pop back out, and then I'm going to put on the screen what we've often heard are the reasons that people decide to use substances, and see if any of these maybe resonate with you, and take a little bit of a look at why that's an important thing to have in the back of your mind. So the reasons that people often give for choosing to use some kind of substance, whatever that may be, is for fun. It's to blow off steam. It's to be with friends. It's as a relax. Sometimes it's to escape or to not feel. It's to be social. It's for taking the edge off, a really particularly rough day or troubling time. For some people, it's hard to connect or be open or be vulnerable without taking that additional edge off, right? Like, because I don't want to be too vulnerable, and if I'm not fully in control, then I'm a little bit more loose, and it's easier to just kind of go with the flow. And so the whole idea of being your authentic self is sometimes terrifying for people, and they like to hide behind, a couple of beers or a couple of glasses of wine or whatever the case may be. So there's lots of reasons that people choose to use substances to game or to gamble, and many of them are positive. Those things exist for the most part as a way to be social and have fun, and we need that probably now more than ever. But there is clearly a line over which things can go seriously wrong. What we're hoping that when people think about these motivations is they start thinking about healthy alternatives, or perhaps why these are the things that they're choosing to do at the end of a day or on a weekend, when maybe there's some other things that they would be doing that would better serve whatever it is that may be at the root of what's behind that motivation. So let's peel back the layers of that onion and see why we need to have that glass of wine or that beer at the end of the day. The reality is that substance use has been around for as long as there's been humans. Whether it's for celebrations, rituals such as finding your spirit animal, or for entering the realm of the warrior, as a way to get through a long hunt or a long journey, or to grieve, substances have been used for millennia. There's also generally been norms that have gone along with those. You didn't just drink the magical elixir because you felt like it. There were conditions and designated individuals like shaman or medicine men that needed to be present. There were expectations around how it would be used and for how long and under what specific conditions. However, then as now, there were very likely people who felt for whatever reason that they needed to rely on those substances for coping with the day-to-day, not just under those special circumstances. And really not much has changed. Moving through the age of prohibition, where for the most part it just led to making bad choices underground, to an era where it seems like anything goes, with the relaxing of laws and an overall greater societal acceptance of the use of substances, there is something to be said for those cultural norms. In college, there might have been an expectation to party your face off, whereas that tends to lessen as we grow up and we move into more responsible roles. We're expected to grow up and adult. However, there are still locations such as bachelor parties, New Year's parties, sports playoffs, mess dinners, where the expectation is that there will be drinking, and unfortunately often to excess. So it comes then as no surprise that there's often conflict in terms of what exactly is acceptable, safe, tolerable, or even, in some cases, required. Because let's face it, it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to stand up to peer pressure, whether that's at a frat party or a smoker or a mess dinner. The coping mechanisms around substance use can be viewed as two sides of a coin. For some, the substance use is the coping mechanism that's used to get through life, a hard day, a messy breakup, what have you. For others, the coping mechanisms are more about how not to use the substances, either because they're in recovery or they're just legitimately trying to follow those low risk guidelines, or because they simply don't like taking part in whatever the group is doing, but they still want the connection that goes with participating in that activity. Needless to say, it's a complicated situation and one that we would all do well to consider more regularly as we try to create or shift environments that promote responsible use, especially in the context of self-medication rather than seeking appropriate help or treatment. Nobody, I think, these days says, oh yeah, you're having a really bad day, you should go home and have a six-pack. Like, nobody says that anymore, hopefully. And we should certainly not be using it as a measuring stick of how cool or amazing or masculine or macho or whatever word you want to throw in there we are. It shouldn't be a way that's used to allow people to fit in. But that's not necessarily the case. And I'm certainly not trying to make this an accusation, but there are certain things within military culture that influence substance use. So if we look at the screen, those same three sets of words are there. They're the same as just general culture, because there's lots of things that separates city culture from military culture, but there's lots of things that we have in common. Do you think, and I'm just asking this rhetorically, that there is an expectation still in 2020, if we were to have them, that there is going to be drinking at mess dinners? Would it be deemed acceptable if you made all the toasts using ginger ale or cranberry juice or water? Is there an expectation that there's going to be drinking if there's a smoker or at an at-home or at any of the events where historically alcohol has been a part of the picture? Or can you, if you've been in longer than 10 years or so, can you see that shift that has happened? Can you see the shift that's still happening? Can you see that there's been some progress, or maybe that there's still a ways to go? These are all things that we need to consider as we move forward to a time where we once again can get together and do these things. So maybe now is a really great time to have that reflection. And we can all probably think of people who have, in quotation marks, successfully used alcohol to help to deal with their problems and still gone on to have a really successful career. But I think we can also think of people where that went totally sideways. They found solace in the bottle of a bottle and it got them in big trouble. It was a career ender in a lot of ways, or insofar as, it probably prevented them from maybe getting as far in the career that they had hoped. So it can be a very dangerous and slippery slope to think that I can deal with it on my own using some kind of substance to help me, when in fact what we really need to do is think about some of the alternatives that are out there for us. Part of that issue comes as a result of this, though, and that is that substance use has such a strong connection to connection. And we know that belonging and fitting in is as important to adults as it was when we were in junior high. And really, it doesn't matter the organization that you work for. Where you work is really just junior high with different hallways. So when you read these quotes, can you relate to any of them? Has any of this happened to you? Was it something that happened when you were young and foolish? Or are some of these situations things that might have happened more recently than you care to admit? One of the things that we know is that the opposite of addiction is connection. That need to belong and be a part of something is so strong that in its absence, alcohol or drugs or gaming or gambling can become a substitute of sorts, and obviously that can lead to problems. We know that there is a tremendous role that friends and social support play. When you hear the briefings on stress management and mental fitness and suicide awareness, you're going to hear about the importance of maintaining that good mental health. The issue is that, and no offense, but this is especially true for men, that when it comes to figuring out how to make and maintain those friends, there's a tendency to do what is fast, fun, and easy. Go for beers. And that's, of course, a gross generalization, and women also fall into that trap. But we need to try to figure out ways to not just always have the bar or the pub and the game and a couple of drinks be the go-to, right? For Everybody, the issue really is, what else can you do that still allows you to socialize, to have fun, to let your hair down, to blow off steam, but that doesn't involve drinking or disappearing into someone's basement for 5 hours of Call of Duty? Those are the questions we need to ask. Now, for me, it's a little bit sometimes hard to wrap my head around because I'm not a drinker, I'm a talker. So if you give me a cup of tea and some friends, typically I'm good. Throw in chocolate and 100% I'm sorted. But that's not necessarily the case for everybody. For some people, that college style party lifestyle was the pinnacle of their fun, relaxed, most connected times, and how to move out of that can be really challenging, especially now. And I know most people are sick and tired of hearing about the pandemic, but it's the reality that we're all experiencing. And the reality is that everybody is experiencing it differently. We don't know what's going on for people and the layers of additional stress that this might add. We don't necessarily know unless we ask, because we're not really open to sharing stuff that's not going well in our own lives. The issue is right now that everything that is going on, the things that members have been called on to do, for example, as part of Op Laser, are all things that would happen during a natural disaster because this is a natural disaster. The only difference is that when you look out the window, it doesn't look like it. There's no fire, there's no flooding, no collapsed buildings. Everything looks the same, but at the same time, everything is different. All the things that we did to deal with stress and crisis, we got together, right? Honestly, whether that was to drink or not, but people got together to hang out, to support, to debrief, to rally around a cleanup effort or to help rebuild a house or whatever the case may be. But that's not happening right now. So some of our most essential coping strategies, each other, have been taken away. And as social beings who need one another to survive and thrive, social distancing, social isolation, it's very disruptive, very debilitating, and very draining. Ironically, we end up looking for coping mechanisms to replace our coping mechanisms. And what we know is that substance abuse has increased since COVID hit. I shouldn't say substance abuse, substance use has increased. With that, probably also some abuse, but just suffice it to say that people are drinking more. Liquor stores have, for whatever reason, been deemed an essential service and have been from the beginning, and sales have literally skyrocketed to the point that they resemble those seen during holiday season and Black Friday. Only that same sales volume is happening every day over the last several months. A NANOS poll commissioned by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction released in June showed that about 20% of Canadians have been drinking more since the pandemic began. And I think that if we were to look at those numbers since June, they would be the same or perhaps even higher. Now, the flip side to that, of course, is that 80% of people were drinking less or the same. But for those people who are up the 20%, that can be a problem. And it can be especially a problem in the context of family violence when you now have additional causes of stress and anxiety, easier access to alcohol, and people trapped in a space together where there's very little opportunity to go to somewhere safe. And it can become a really volatile, really problematic situation very, very quickly. So to put it in perspective and maybe perhaps make it more reflective of what's happening, 1 in 5 people say they are drinking more than before, particularly when they have to stay at home. And I think that part of that, and the research would support this, is that it's because the lines have been blurred between work time and relaxation or fun time. You're at home, you're on the computer, it's business on top, pajamas on the bottom. Nobody knows whether there's Bailey's in your cup. So there's that. And also just like, when does the day end? Like, am I really at work? I've got stuff that I can do, but does it matter that I'm A, wearing pajamas, and B, having Bailey's in my cup, right? Like, so there's lots of issues around that. And that's linked to, in part, the stress and boredom that are most recently or frequently mentioned as reasons for drinking. 8% of people said that on at least one occasion they had not been able to stop once they started consuming alcohol. And 1 in 7 people expressed remorse after consuming alcohol, typically to excess. So we know that from an alcohol perspective anyway, use has seen a real upswing, and the reasons are pretty self-explanatory. The reason for that is that when we're stressed, we go to the default things that make us feel better. that help us find answers, that help us to feel some sense of normalcy. But right now, that's all been impacted, all been changed, and all the traditional ways that we do that have been taken away. And part of that is even just in terms of whether you have to mask up before you go to work and then keep your mask on all day, or when you mask up to go for groceries or anywhere to, for that matter, things have changed, right? Like everything even just looks different from that perspective. So we may not be seeing those burning buildings, but we're seeing all these people masking up, and it's creating a barrier for our safety, and yet it still feels like we're that much less connected to people. And even if you're at work, the traditional times that you would normally spend chatting or visiting or hanging out or catching up, coffee or at lunchtime, we can't do that anymore either. I was talking to the dietitian who works at the clinic on base, and she said that even though she's been at work from the beginning, they're actually being discouraged from being in the hallways more than they need to. So even those casual encounters are eliminated. So even though you're in a building with other people, you're still separated from them. And that's just weird. It just feels awkward and isolating. And as great as technology is, FaceTime, Zoom, WhatsApp, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, they're all nice alternatives, but it's not the same. And I think that you can feel that. I know that I can, and I'm fortunate. I live with my husband and my daughter and my dog, so I'm not alone during the day, but I still feel like there's something missing. I'm missing that rapport that I have with my team. I'm missing that ability to just bounce ideas off people without, trying to get a FaceTime organized. And for a lot of people, that emptiness is something that drugs, alcohol, gaming, or gambling can fill. Fortunately, we've got a couple of things in place that might help us better stay on the straight and narrow, and so maybe let's focus on that. Because even before the pandemic, the low risk drinking and most recently lower risk cannabis use guidelines have been in place to help people use those substances more responsibly. And as with many of the things that we've seen, and you'll see it in stress and you'll see it in mental fitness, there's a continuum. So if you comfortably and legitimately feel that your use of whatever your vice of choice might be is in the green zone, then you're probably fine. But if you feel that that Chianti that you might be having when you get home at the end of the day to make supper is becoming a bottle, or that you can't wait to get through the door before you get that first pour, then maybe you're going to be finding yourself on that slippery slope. If things have been slipping and your use is controlling you more than you are controlling it, then it might be time to seek out some help or support. We have also to remember that we're not always the best judge of what's going on for us. We might think we still have everything all in control. And sometimes it might take somebody else calling us out on that change in behavior or whatever it is that they're seeing. And we need to be open to hearing that. So until we hear those words, we might not fully appreciate that we've perhaps lost the plot a bit. The key is to go into whatever it is that you're doing with your eyes wide open. Know what the limits are, set yours, and stick with them. Just in case you've forgotten, let's start with drinking. Here is what a standard drink looks like. So it's 341 mils or 12 ounces of regular beer, cider, or a cooler. So that's generally 5% alcohol. 142 milliliters or 5 ounces of 12% alcohol, like wine. And 43 mils or 1.5 ounces of distilled hard liquor, typically 40% alcohol. That's how much alcohol should be in your glass, depending on what it is that you're drinking. Bartenders know this, and they should be pouring accordingly, but of course there are those who forego the shot glass or the pre-measured pour devices for eyeballing it and perhaps overpour, perhaps even more so if this is a place that you're familiar with and comfortable with, and you have rapport with the bartender. And certainly if you're just at a house party, who's ever in charge of pouring drinks probably is using a bit of a generous hand when pouring and measuring. So it's even more important when we consider this next slide. When we're talking standard drinks, what we are being limited to is based on our sex. So men tend to be bigger, have less body fat, and metabolize alcohol differently. So they're allowed 15 drinks a week, but not more than 3 a day. Women are allowed 10 drinks a week and not more than 2 a day. And if you're trying to do some fun math, it's not going to work because you can't actually go 3 times 7 days a week is 21 drinks for the gents. And ladies, we don't get to go up to 14 because those amounts are based on the fact that they know that we're not necessarily going to drink the same amount from day to day. There might be days that we drink a little bit more, might be days we don't drink at all, but it's based on the amount that is going to have the least likely negative effects on health and safety. So there's going to be an update to those at some point, but no word yet on exactly when that might happen. Why that's important is because what we want to avoid is binge drinking. which means that you've exceeded the daily maximum in a 2-hour period, because that's where you're going to have the most health risks, both direct and related to safety due to accidents. So what the slide is saying is that if you're a man and you have had 5 or more drinks in a 2-hour period, you are in a binge drinking zone. Ladies, you hit that binge mark if you are at 4 drinks or more in that same 2-hour period. Now, if you go to the bar after work or you go home and you have a glass of wine when you walk through the door at 5 o'clock, and you have another glass of wine at 7:30, and then you go to bed, you're fine. That wasn't a binge. For one thing, it was greater than 2-hour period and you only had 2 drinks. But if between 4 and 6 o'clock you had 4 drinks, ladies, then that's a problem. If that bottle of wine is empty, that was a binge. Gents, if you've had 5 beers in 2 hours, that's a binge. The reason that that becomes a problem is because alcohol is actually toxic. It is really a poison. So all of those health risks you see in the column labeled 0, 3 are things that are going to increase proportionately and more quickly as you drink more. And for the people that are still arguing for the benefits of drinking that glass of wine or that beer, if you don't drink, you can get those exact same benefits from having a glass of purple grape juice or an extra serving of vegetables. So really, there's no reason ever to start drinking, and certainly lots of good reasons to keep your drinking at a level and at a rate that is going to be safer. So switching gears a little bit to cannabis, let me just preface this by saying that any of the policy around cannabis use, especially in terms of duty, timings, equipment usage, what you can do in terms of your duties, that's to be delivered by the military command team. They are the final authority on what determines appropriate use and conduct. The only thing that we touch in health promotion is anything related to harm reduction and lower risk use. And we are definitely needing to be aware of the lower risks, because there is a risk. There are definitely risks associated with cannabis use. And because Canada has the highest cannabis use rates in the world, which is not necessarily something to be proud of, it is something worth sitting up and taking note of. Because accidents and injuries do occur when under the influence of cannabis, which is why the keep your skunk in your trunk rules, you see them on the buses, the police are trying to enforce that, because it's a thing. People think that they're driving more safely, they believe that they're driving more safely, but all the credible research that is peer-reviewed and done under appropriate parameters that determine what good science is show that that's actually not the case. The other thing to remember is that cannabis use disorder and other impacts on mental health from cannabis use also need to be considered. We have to take into consideration, especially for the younger members, that anybody under the age of 25 is at a greater risk of developing future problems with respect to psychoses, schizophrenia, anxiety, and depression when they start using before the age of 25, because the brain is still developing and it's just a really sensitive organ. It's what makes us human, and we need to have the amount of time needed for it to fully develop. So starting later is one of the things that we're going to talk about in just a second. And the other piece to remember is that there is definitely a potential to become addicted to cannabis despite the stories to the contrary. So you should be following both all the military requirements for duty as well as with consideration to the long-term consequences. And lower risk doesn't mean no risk, right? The Center for Addiction and Mental Health revised the guidelines in 2018, and they really are just truly lower risk guidelines, because depending on how you use cannabis, there are lower and higher health impacts. And it's pretty much a no-brainer, but to avoid all the risks, abstinence is the best bet. But barring that as an option, then the following are some things that you need to consider. As I just mentioned, delay starting cannabis use until after age 25 to minimize the serious mental health impacts. Choose lower risk products, oils and edibles as examples, versus things that you have to burn. If you do choose to smoke, avoid deeply inhaling and holding it in your lungs. Avoid, absolutely every single person, avoid synthetic cannabinoids in cannabis because they can be toxic and deadly. Limit how often you use cannabis. Keep it to a minimum frequency, just as you would any other medicine, right? Even medicinal cannabis needs to be used as infrequently as possible to get the benefit that you're trying to get, but without all of the side effects. So the more you use, the more frequently, the higher the dosage, the more risks there are going to be. Obviously, you're going to avoid driving or operating machinery. And if you're at risk of mental health problems, either ones that you've already experienced, such as depression or anxiety, or you have perhaps a family history of them, avoid cannabis. And if you may be or are pregnant, obviously also avoid cannabis. In terms of gaming and gambling, they're often kind of overlooked in the addictions world because they're not consumables. So people forget that they can be just as addicting, even though we know they could also have a really significant negative impact on people's lives. From a financial perspective, from a social relationship perspective, the problems that are commonly seen are there. And now it may be even becoming more common because there's been such a push to online gaming and gambling. So it can happen from the comfort of your living room, because it's really easy to be up to the wee hours of the morning chasing that dragon, trying to regain those losses or chase those wins, or carry on with the online role play games, because it's easy to feel connected to people when you're doing those multiple interactive type activities, but it could still affect your mood. It's going to affect your productivity. If you're up till 4 playing games and then you have to be at work at 7, you're not going to be as on your game. And it could potentially also affect your finances, depending on if you're gambling using real money. And the thing is, with respect to all of these, whether it's alcohol, cannabis, gaming, or gambling, as a supervisor or as a peer, if you're seeing this with someone that you work with, have a conversation. And it doesn't have to be an immediate disciplinary style of conversation. Approach them and say, I noticed something different. I noticed you've not been yourself. Um, is there something you need to talk about? Or like, I can't believe how different you seem, or it's really unlike you to be late for work as often. Whatever. If there needs to be discipline, there needs to be discipline. But every single conversation doesn't need to be immediately jacking that person up. You're not going to get to the bottom of what's really at issue if that's the approach that you take. So from a supervisory perspective, be human. Give them an opportunity to share with you maybe what's going on. And then if discipline is necessary, by all means, take those actions. But if you just need to get them to help because they don't really know where to go, or they're too embarrassed to have looked for that help, that's also your job. And while there currently aren't any guidelines around gaming, they are in development. So for the moment, the best advice is to set a limit and stay within it, whether that's a dollar amount or a period of time. If you're going to be at the casino for 2 hours, when the 2 hour mark hits, go home. If you're online gaming or gambling, when the 2 hour mark hits, set a timer on your phone. When that goes off, shut down your console. When you get to $50 or $100 or whatever the amount is that you're setting that's responsible, when you get there, go home or shut your console off. Here again, the pandemic is wreaking some amount of havoc because people are seeking ways to entertain themselves, and it's fun, and again, it's escape. It makes it seem like things are a little bit more normal. It's a good way to avoid the world. It's easy to escape to the rec room or the basement and while away the hours or lose track of time, but it's not necessarily the best investment. If you want to invest in yourself, then there's lots of ways that we can help you out. We've got courses that can help increase your self-awareness, help learn skills both individually and as a supervisor. And it's difficult now with limitations on the number of people that we can have in the classroom, but we are looking at ways that some of these things are going to be able to be offered on an online platform where you will still be able to get your HRMS or Mighty code. So that's kind of more on that, like more to follow. But certainly, if this is something that you think that you will have an opportunity to encourage your staff or your subordinates to participate in, then it's an excellent opportunity, and not to wait until it's used as a punitive measure. We don't like people having to be in anger because, the shit hit the fan and they got in trouble already, and now this is being done as a way to try to make amends. We don't want it to be in that perspective. We want people to have this truly be preventive, right? So remember that before you send someone on a course because you think that they did bad actions. We always want people to have a takeaway message at the end of these briefings. So remember, and please believe this, that you are interesting and fun without substances. People want to know you. You've got stuff to share. We all have things that we know that others don't. And if we can be our authentic selves, it just makes for such a much richer experience. As much as you are able to enjoy time with others, abide by all the social distancing public health measures, consider porch visits, or use those tech alternatives, even though they're maybe not as satisfying. Take a chance and step out of your comfort zone when it comes to finding ways to have fun. Know that it doesn't always have to revolve around beer and wings. There's other things that you can do. It's a little bit more tricky now, but there's still stuff that we can do. And always remember that whatever you choose to do, there will be consequences. Avoid losing your license, affecting your relationship, or hurting someone. So don't drive impaired. Be responsible. And consider that no matter what is going on in your life that you feel is outside of your control or is making you feel bad, drinking and drugging isn't going to make it better. It won't help. There's lots of resources available. I'm going to put up a number in a second that are on base or on the civvy side that can help you. Take advantage of those. And remember that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. So thank you for your attendance. I hope that you got a couple of reminders. I hope you've got a little bit of perspective in terms of how we are all having to deal with the pandemic and how that's affecting things. Hopefully you have a couple of tips around ways that you can be a little bit safer and more likely to not run into problems, even should you choose to use some of these substances and or activities as ways to help to while away the hours or just give you some fun and social times. Use that number, call the number, put it on your speed dial, if not for yourself, then maybe for someone else that you're having a conversation with. And if you want to follow us on social media, we would be happy to have you like and follow and share some of the things that you see on both our Instagram and Facebook. Lots of tips, videos, fun stuff, things that you can click on, and just stuff that you can have in your back pocket so that you can make things better. So take care. Have a great rest of your day or week or whatever it is that is going to be in front of you, and stay healthy. Have a good year, and bye for now.